everybody. Welcome to the Cult Bar. I'm here with my fabulous partner, Renee. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great.
Great, great. So this is much better than the people we're going to be talking about tonight. So,
Yeah.
why don't we start off as we always do with what you are drinking this evening?
I am drinking a traditional Kenyan cocktail called a dawa, which means medicine. It's muddled lime, brown sugar, and honey, and vodka. That's it. That's what we're working with.
Mm.
Oh, it's really good.
So does it feel like
That's
it's
all you
healing
need.
you?
Yeah. I actually looked up the history on this because it's kind of interesting. It was invented supposedly in the 80s, but it's apparently based off of a traditional cocktail that women would give their husbands like when they went off on fishing trips or something like that. Like it used to be a hot drink, which makes sense with
Oh,
honey, right? So
yeah,
I
yeah,
had to
yeah.
melt
That
the
would make
honey in
sense.
hot water first and then do the rest so it wouldn't just be like a blob.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Oh, I'm glad that was
Apparently it can also
tasty.
be made with white rum, but this is pretty nice. I think white rum might be too sweet.
Mm. Well, vodka's kind of like a generic that you can mix with damn near anything. So I feel like so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all right, what I am doing is I am doing something called a lion's den because part of that is you went with the Kenyan theme because this is what we're talking about. This happens in Kenya. I went with lion's den because they had to escape to a forest where big cats would potentially kill them.
Yeah.
So what I got was basically it's a drink that is 1.5 ounces of Crown Royal, a half ounce of lemon juice, and a half ounce of they said honey syrup. I didn't have honey syrup, so I just used honey. And thankfully, I was able to put the honey in and make it so it didn't turn into a glob before I mixed it. So that was good. So we would see how this is. Woo!
Strong.
Strong. Yes, very strong. It's the Crown Royal, which for those of you wondering why I'm drinking Crown Royal, it's because my mom, we did this thing where my family does a Thanksgiving Christmas combination because we're all kind of all over the place, and when we can gather at that time, we just make it a one-time gathering.
Right.
So my Christmas present was like this heavy box. I opened it. It's two bottles of Crown Royal, not just one. And I have never said I liked Crown Royal, and I have never had it in front of my parents. Not sure where that came from. My mom was very pleased with herself. She also made me this thing back here, this cork board with all these beer coasters on it, which
That's
is a
cute.
really cool little thing she made for me. So that was a very sweet present. So this is just the Crown Royal is very strong in it. Now you do get a lot of the citrus in it, which is great. And the honey, I think this should have been a warm drink. If
Yeah.
I were to make this again, it would have been warm. I think it would have been better. So yeah,
I think my direction said like, oh, it was traditionally made with honey, but now people do a honey syrup because of the cold honey is not
yeah,
mixable.
yeah,
So I did like a quick and dirty honey syrup. I put my measure of honey in, and then I got my kettle going and just like eyeballed like 1 part hot water and then stirred
yeah.
it really well and then left it until I was ready to come back. So it was like maybe a
Yeah.
half an hour.
Yeah. Well, you have a kettle as you should in your house. We do too. I just a lot of people do not like you have like the electric kettle to get the kettle for your stove.
I had an electric kettle.
Yeah, that's what we have too because that's a little quicker. So
We used to have one for the stove, and they're very cute, but then they're just always in the way when you need to make dinner. So
yeah, there is that. So yeah. So also, folks, go out and get yourself a kettle. It'll make making tea and coffee so much easier. So yeah. So that's our drinks out of the way. So before we start going off here, we are going to get with a little bit of news. All right, Renee, let her rip.
well, so this is really interesting. Part of the reason I wanted to do this one today is because one of the things we'll talk about later is that this pastor who runs this cult in Kenya is at one point in the story arrested and charged with radicalization. And I know in this show, we've talked a little bit about how other countries have laws that sort of let them do more about cults as the cults are actively working on people. And I thought this was interesting because this is kind of a double-edged sword on this particular story, right? Christian churches in Australia are pushing back against new laws about coercive control and high control groups because they are afraid that it will target their churches. So on the one side, you're like, well, should it? Why are we worried about this? You know, what's in the wording? But on the other hand, when you talk about radicalization, the way it comes up later in the episode we're doing tonight, I had to stop and think, well, doesn't it depend on who's making the decision about what's considered radical and what isn't? And so it's a bit of an interesting ethical and legal conundrum here where you definitely want to be able to do things about coercive control. But
Sure.
who decides what the limit is about what you're voluntarily allowed to do, right? Because most of these people are not being held at gunpoint or forced to do the things. In the case of the cult we're talking about tonight, there was more violence. It was maybe a little bit more akin to Jonestown than some of our other ones. But up to a point, at the point that the pastor was arrested, these people are all just making their own decisions. So that's an interesting thing to think about. I am hoping that I'll be able to follow the story a little bit. It's hard to get Australian news here, but it'll be interesting what comes of this because on the one hand, the argument they have is that Australia already has laws that allows them to go after cults. I don't think the US has anything like that, really. You
Not
could
really.
to a church that's a complete fraud, and just because they're a church, like they're good, they're safe because they believe that they're not a fraud, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see if there's like some legal precedent for, in another country at least, for enacting new laws specifically to go after cults, and then how that affects the other churches around them.
Yeah. Also, this is in Australia where Hillsong was started, so there's that to be.
Which was a Christian church, right? So it's like,
Yes,
well,
it
you
was.
know,
Yeah,
sometimes
and yeah. So it's funny, like when we get into this story for this in the Kenyan part, it's really interesting how their laws are a lot different than ours, and how that plays into this even more so. Um, but yeah, it's. I wish we did have some better guidelines for kind of monitoring cults and making sure we take them out. Now, problem is cult is in our parlance in America now is kind of used in a lot of different ways when it's actually not supposed to be. You know,
yeah,
but now there's certain things where you go, cults have to meet certain criteria to me. There's certain things that they need to meet, and some people will just say something like, "Yeah, those people doing CrossFit, that's a cult." I'm like, not really a cult, but those people do talk about it quite a bit.
right. Well, and the other thing too is like there was a movement a while back to stop using the word cult altogether and use the term new religious movement because technically that's all a cult is. And it's like, well, no, because you can have a new religious movement that does not exert coercive control on people, and those movements are fine by me. I can choose to be involved or not be involved, and nobody's getting hurt, and that's fine. But if it is taking advantage of people, it's controlling people, it's exerting spiritual, emotional, otherwise sometimes physical abuse, then we need to be able to have a name for that and be able to call it what it is. And that's, why we have big giant vocabularies full of words that have nuance. So yeah, I don't know. I think also like in the US, if we had better understanding of how to deal with types of abuse that were not plainly physical, we would have better ways to deal with coercive control in other situations.
For sure. And our mental health, the way we approach mental health in this country is not great, especially in relation to this. So,
Yeah.
but so we'll see. Maybe, like you said, maybe we'll get some more news on this. It'll be interesting to hear how that breaks down. So anyway, lots to talk about with this one. It's also, we should mention that this is a fairly new one. This is not terribly old.
Yeah,
And
this was a news item on one of our early episodes. I don't think it was the first episode, but very early on, this was our news item.
yeah, so because this started happening back in 2023, but actually, really, if you go into the story, it happened a little earlier than that. But like the actual part with the starvation bit is that's newer. So I don't know if you had a chance. I watched this one thing where from this news organization called Africa Matters. So it basically covers the entire continent of Africa and the news within that continent. And they were talking to a guy who was in Nairobi who was like uh, talking about how difficult it is to monitor somebody if they have 800 acres of land to do their things. How do you,
In the middle of a
how,
forest, yeah.
in the middle of a forest, like, and remote, like 2 hours away from the nearest town. So, like, how do you monitor that? Like, I get what he's saying. It just was pretty remote, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's so if this takes place in Kenya, obviously,
Well, let's
in
get
the
our content warnings out
trigger.
of the way because there's a lot of them.
Yeah, so you
This
go
one's
ahead and do
particularly
that.
bad. One, there's recency, and I think that that's always a little bit more difficult. And so I think be aware this is ongoing. You could things that you hear about today, if they really upset you, you might like see them on the news tomorrow and have to deal with that. And so that's something I think you should be aware of. Recency does make things a lot more difficult to talk about. Two, we are going to be talking about some very serious coercive religious control as it's the Kenyan Starvation Cult. So there's going to be starvation, there's going to be medical abuse, child sexual abuse, um, sexual assault on adults, organ harvesting, extreme isolation, all manner of violence, particularly against women in the stories that we heard,
Mhm.
and some just really heartbreaking stuff with kids. And not this should be a surprise to anybody, but some very serious incompetence and corruption in the police and government organizations that were supposed to be handling this.
Mhm.
And we'll be talking about a lot of evangelical stuff that has a lot in common with some of the evangelical stuff in the US. So, although the culture is very different, there's going to be a lot of parallels. And that's just some things to keep in mind. As always, you start getting uncomfortable, you start feeling like you don't want to deal with this right now, or you're in a bad place and you want to deal with it later. Like, nothing we're doing here is going to change your life to the point that you need to stick with it if you're not feeling great about it.
Yep. So protect your mental health and all that stuff as we always kind of promote. So uh, there's also a lot of like food control, obviously, since it's a starvation thing. So that's a very big thing in this cult, obviously. So this takes place in Kenya. It's actually trying to think here's about 2 hours away from a town called Malindi, and it takes place in the Shakahola Forest.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the compound is, 800 acres. So it's run by a guy named Paul McKenzie. Founded basically the organization was the Good News International Ministries. What I thought was interesting is when I was listening to the podcast about it, where they were saying how evangelical in their parlance isn't exactly the same. It's more like televangelists, and those televangelists have ultimate control over everything in that particular organization, whereas evangelical is a bit more spread out in the control, I think.
Well, I would say I think that there's nuanced differences, but like it was like, well, it's a church that revolves around the preacher, right? And I think
Mhm.
that what we're seeing in individual congregations, that's true. You're not seeing like an evangelical church that runs all of the little ones, right? It
Yeah,
is stuff like Hillsong is a massive operation, but the one in New York ran around, oh God, I
Paul
forgot his name.
Lentz. Paul
Paul Lentz.
Lentz,
Um,
Mr. Abs.
yeah. So like I think there is a lot of similarities. I think it's probably more in line with what we were talking about in the Teen Mania episode, where like these are the churches that have so much more performance. So they're not going to tell you like we're Baptist, we're Catholic, we're Presbyterian, whatever. It's like we're just Christians, but the element that makes it what it is that it's very flamboyant, over the top, performance based.
Yeah, and as usual, it has this guy's a fairly charismatic guy who was a taxi driver and decided to become a priest, which is great. Like,
Well, that's what I thought was interesting. So it sounds like, because I watched the Africa Report, not Africa Matters. So I watched Africa Report piece on it, and then I listened to the podcast, and I did like just some very surface level poking around on other stuff. It sounds like he always wanted to be a preacher, but the church he was doing his preaching at was like, no, we don't like this. You can't do this here. And then, so then he was a taxi driver for a while until he could find a congregation, I guess is the way to say it. And it does seem like the podcast and the Africa Report piece both covered that the woman who helped him initially found the first version of Good News International was like, this is some bullshit. And so he basically just smeared her to everyone and kicked her out of the church.
Yeah, it was a thing where basically I think at the first one, they were the lady accused him of like taking the money from the church and using it on himself, and he just said, claimed she was a witch.
Yeah.
Go back to the basics, the good old state fighting. Claiming she's a witch. And
I do wish that I had more time to look into like what the culture around that in Kenya is, because I know in some places that is still just as serious as it ever was. And in some places, it's only going to be serious to people who are in these hardcore evangelical groups. But either way, to her and her position in her life, it was very serious. So, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things I remember, the one thing was I remember them saying about how when he was young and he was into church and he really loved it because he could be the center of attention. And everybody kind of thought he was just this, awesome little kid. And then the brothers and the sisters were like, yeah, he had a super bad temper. Like, so like, and he was very violent when he was angry, and that obviously manifests itself later on down the road. But
they said like he would lash out against whoever was around, and I think that's a particular, like, that's something to pay attention to, right? Because you have people who have a bad temper and will be irrationally angry, but at the thing they're mad at. And then you have people who are irrationally angry in an irrational way. And it sounds like he's the latter.
Yeah.
If he's angry, it doesn't matter what he's angry about. He's going to just don't be in his way.
Yeah. So, like you said, the guy called this lady a witch, and she was hosting out. The church was in her place. That was in her house, I recall, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so he says she's a witch. They have to get out. He says, I need money. Let's build a church. They build a church somehow. I'm always baffled by this. Just like, hey, I need money to build a church. And people are like, yeah, absolutely. Here you go. Here's all my money. And maybe it's just my just not thinking that I would ever do that thing, but it's a whole thing with culture. You think, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, if you're in the middle of it and you're in a religious thing where you're really believing what's going on, then yeah, you probably are going to do that. So,
well, I think too, if you have to think also that at this point in time, he wasn't doing or saying anything particularly out there. It was just maybe a little more misogynist, or a little bit more the same woman who described what evangelical means, a little more alpha male than maybe we'd like to hear about. But the reason that the co-founder wanted out is because he was stealing. And those people didn't believe that he was stealing. They believed that she was lying. And so it's like, well, now we don't have anywhere to meet. Obviously, we should build a place to meet. And I think that makes sense when you consider that they didn't know that he was stealing from them.
yeah. That's a fair
Anybody
point.
sitting here listening to this, whether you're listening live, you're watching later, whatever you're doing, Doug and I both need money for a lot of things.
Yeah.
None of us are gonna like do anything crazy to you if you give it to us. We'll just take it and use it. So just FYI, you DM
Yep.
us on any of our social medias and we'll like give you the Venmo or the PayPal, whatever
Yep. Whatever you
method
want to
you
use.
prefer. You just give it to us and we won't tell you to do anything. We'll just take the money and we'll pay our bills or whatever.
Yeah.
So there you
Or,
go.
we could also take photos and show them to you what we're doing with the money if you'd like. That really
Yeah,
float your boat.
yeah. Not photos of our feet or anything like that. That's not for
No,
sale.
you definitely do want to see any of that from me for sure. So yeah, and so they get this whole new church, and this allows him to grow. And like you said, he's not saying anything crazy at this point. Apparently, the one lady they talked to in the podcast who was the grandmother. Again, I didn't take as many notes this time.
Paula Ya
Well, there was another one that was like a
or Palua
mother.
Ya.
Yeah, but she was like she went in because she'd heard this guy was like he would heal people in his sermons. Like somebody have seizures and he'd lay his hands on them and then the seizure he'd pray to God and the seizures would stop and all that charlatan stuff that we've heard about a
Right.
thousand
And
times.
she had her granddaughter this is particularly tragic and ironic to me. And I'm gonna just if you haven't followed the story, I'll spoil it for you. Nothing bad happens to the little girl that we're about to talk about. But her granddaughter actually had a medical condition that made it so that she could not properly digest her food. I think it sounded like gastroparesis to me from the way they
Hmm.
described it,
To
which
me
is
too.
where you eat, but your body can't digest it, so you end up throwing it back up. And none of the doctors they had seen could do anything about it. She went to like alternative medicine and just basically nothing was working. So she goes and she sees him heal this person in active seizure. She's like, I'm in. And she starts bringing her granddaughter to church there
Hmm.
to help her with this medical issue that is causing her basically to starve, even though she wants to eat and is, trying not to starve.
Hmm.
Um, like I said, gratefully nothing happens to that girl that's egregiously bad.
Yeah.
We'll get through that story because there's a lot of working parts and a lot of parts of the story, but I did just want to give that spoiler up front. So if you're listening to this, that little girl's fine. The grandmother never,
Yeah.
well, yeah, but I mean, like, as far as like these things that happened, the grandmother didn't live in the Shakahola Forest with her granddaughter at any point. They just commuted back and forth. She ends up there later living there under different circumstances, but without her granddaughter.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, so she basically, I think it was because like their granddaughter started to get a little better, and she was like attributing it to this Mackenzie fellow that he had, whatever his influence was making
yeah,
her feel better. So then the granddaughter ended up going back to
well, they
Melindy.
both did because I guess she was a
Yeah.
business owner and she was one of the people who did not sell everything and move there. She just had a place there, and then when her granddaughter started to improve, they went back to the town so she could take care of her business, and she would come back for services.
Yeah.
But then where this all turns, which is I think in like 10 to 15 years, we're going to hear so many stories where this is the pivot point. Where this all turns is COVID hits.
Hmm.
And these people are all isolated in the middle of nowhere with a man who's already telling them that you can't trust modern medicine, you can't get vaccines. The medical doctors are wicked and evil. And everybody there is pretty healthy as far as COVID goes because they're not interacting with anybody else. And then you add to that he said that the end of the world is coming and it's probably going to be caused by a virus.
Hmm.
And in one of the things they said, he actually said there's going to be a virus that even the white man can't cure. And so while COVID is going on, that sounds legit, especially because they're
Yeah.
probably getting all of their information filtered through him because they're not allowed to watch TV. They're not allowed to listen to music. They're not allowed to engage with any entertainment, right?
Yep.
So oh shit, he's right. Like if I had any doubts, I don't have doubts now. And that's when Ya brings two of her friends back and like we're gonna be safe here during COVID and it's gonna be great. And they pretty immediately notice some things changed. And they realize when they go to leave that one of the things that's changed is you are no longer allowed to leave. And so that's how it ends up that she is living there. And I think at one point she no longer had a house there.
No, she when she brought her two friends, she actually sold everything to kind of go back in. Was I think is how that worked out, so that she could also give money to Mackenzie and his farm,
Right, of
like
course.
because that was his prerequisite. If you're going to come live on this farm, you build this up with me. This will be great. This will be our little space, so we can worship the way we want to. The stereotypical isolationist move. Let's go here. Let's all be together.
Well,
Kind
and
of
then we
deal.
find, I think she said her and her friends were like, we don't like this, we're going to leave. And then they were threatened by the guards with machetes, you're not leaving. And then over the next several weeks, as people who did the same thing she did, who would come just for services and leave, they would come and then not be allowed to leave. So it
Yeah.
was very like, 1 week you can come and go if you have a place on the outside. And the next week, if you try to leave, they will literally kill you with a machete. And they had seen it happen. They knew that this was really happening. It wasn't just a threat. People were being murdered for trying to leave. So they did
Mhm.
not leave.
Yeah. So this lady and her two friends, they are like, this is all wrong. Why is it? They go and they go to all the services, and obviously it's very apocalyptic. He gets very dark. Like it used to be really charismatic, and now it turns into almost like fire and brimstone kind of deal, from how they were explaining it. But in the midst of all this, he decrees that he has heard directly from God how you can get to heaven, and that is to eat less. Eat less. Like that's initially how it starts. It's
Well,
eat
that was
less.
before COVID because
Yeah.
the granddaughter improved because they were like basically intermittent fasting.
Hmm.
And then at this point, it becomes even more serious where it's like, you're not going to eat at all. And you're like basically going to starve your way to heaven. Right. And then he laid out his plan. And this is wild to me because he laid this out to the people. This tells you what the security must have been like. Because he said,
And
first, we're going to
also,
kill the children. Then we're going to kill all the single women. Then we'll kill all the mothers and wives. Then we'll kill all the men. And then I'll die.
yeah,
And that's the order we're going to do it in.
yeah, it's wild to me that they said that kids should go first. Like, if you want to like rile up people to doubt you, I feel like that's the place you start. But that just shows you the level of indoctrination that he had done upon these folks. I mean, he had hundreds of people like that were following him, and so the idea that he was like, yeah, we're going to kill all the kids first, and we're going to have to do this because the apocalypse is coming. We need to starve ourselves to death so that we can meet Jesus before the apocalypse comes. I think
Yeah.
that was
When I think too, if you're in this space of like very surreal, what the fuck is going on? Like last week, everything was normal. And then this happens, like there's probably a part of you that's in very deep denial about it.
Mhm.
Um, and like we saw this in Jonestown too, right? Like people just didn't really think it was going to happen. And then they started killing the kids. Well, once they start killing the kids, Jonestown's a little different because it happened all at once. But it's like,
Mhm.
I think that's got to be one of those things that really takes it out of people. Like it takes the fight out of them. It probably makes them think that they can't go back to the real world because, oh, you were involved with killing kids. So there's a lot. I think there's a lot at play when you say, oh, we're going to do this first, because that allows for a lot of excess manipulation, even if people aren't on board with it, because they might assume that you're really not going to do it.
For sure. And, the idea of like, there's also the idea that they've been told that everybody is against them. So the idea of leaving and going to the place where that are filled with evil folks who want to do them harm. I mean, there's that part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
He said there's no entertainment. You can't watch sports. You can't watch TV. You can't read. Like he just made it so anything that was any sort of information that you could have or get was no longer allowed, and you shouldn't talk to anybody else. Only the people here. Um,
Right. And then they
so,
couldn't leave to talk to anybody else anyway.
mhm,
Right. You think too, like it does seem like at that point, I find it difficult to believe that Ya and her friends were the only people that were sneaking out into the woods at night to find, like they were foraging for
mhm,
food and drinking water. I
mhm.
think there was probably a lot of that going on, and probably
I
a lot of
agree.
that in families with children. But even in Ya's case, they wanted to leave. They had already come up with a way to sneak around at night. They did not feel safe trying to escape because they were certain they would be killed, whether
Mhm,
by the guards or by the literal, like you said, these jaguars and large wild cats out there that would eat them.
mhm.
So it's hard to know with the people who were there at that time, how many were in a similar situation as Ya that were just like, I would leave if I felt like I had any chance of making it out alive.
Yeah, and it's. I think you're right. Just the idea of like there had to be other people foraging, like trying to figuring out where I can go out and get something. Even if it's a little water out of a puddle, which is very unsafe to drink. But
Yeah.
the idea of that, or just finding berries somewhere around so you have something. And if you had kids that were starving and they were crying and upset, I mean, as a parent, you'd be like, "Hey, I need to stop this," right? I mean, that would be your inclination, even if you believe the best thing for them is to follow the orders of this guy. Still, you'd want to make sure your kid was okay, right? So, I mean, that's what I would think you'd want to do. But yeah,
So what I think is interesting, or maybe not even interesting, maybe it's actually like in line. We see this actually a lot, but it's so rarely laid out as clearly as it is in this case, is like very quickly he realized that no, that people were not dying fast enough.
yeah. What's with the dying fast? Other than
Well,
he had he didn't really declare a date specifically, like a lot of these nincompoops. But
I think that probably has more to do with, and we'll not at this point in the story, they're still exhuming bodies, they're still doing autopsies, they're still,
years later, they're still doing this. So
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like the last news article I saw about this was 13 weeks ago, and they had paused exhuming the graves so that they could catch up on the DNA identification.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the things that they noticed right away when they started, when they basically raided this place and started digging up bodies, is that a lot of the bodies had evidence of organ harvesting.
Mhm.
So I wonder if that's part of it. Although it's kind of crazy because it seems like the healthier a
My
body
thoughts.
is, the better, like there's a lot of weird stuff with, like, I mean, I guess, look, I have never been in the business of black market organs. Maybe you take what you can get when you're that desperate. But yeah, I think that there was probably, we're going to find out someday what he was really doing and why he really wanted them to die so quickly. I don't think he ever had any intention of dying himself. As
Oh,
you know, because they
definitely
found out
not.
when they raided the place, he had a nice house with plenty of food.
And electricity and everything. So yeah.
So yeah, I think it was more nefarious than it even sounds on its face. I think it was about power and control, but I think he was also using the the bodies to make money.
Yeah, I think that when you put it in that context, I knew he was doing that, but I never connected those dots. So like maybe he had people like, I will pay you X amount of money for this, but I need it by this date. So maybe they just weren't
Or
dying
yeah, or
fast
he
enough.
just wanted, he got greedy, who knows, right? Like it's wild because the other thing we see is like in the Africa report um video segment, whatever you call it, his mother and his son were like, he's fine, he didn't do anything wrong, but they lived there, they went to the church, so like they know that it happened, they were there, it was happening to them, but
Yeah.
they do not appear malnourished, nor do they appear like people who are recovering from being malnourished. So I think that perhaps they got the benefits and perks of being his immediate family.
For sure. I mean, we've seen that sort of thing play out in cults countless times, where the family or the favored folks get better treatment and more things than the other folks. So, no doubt, and you're right, he was never planning to be the last one to die. He would just, my guess is he would do that, and then he'd be like, "Well, I'm just going to pick up and go somewhere else and start this all over again." Is
Yeah.
what I would presume he was going to do.
I mean, I'm
So,
sure that he made quite a bit of money back because he did not invite them to come live with him on his 800 acres. He sold them the land on the 800 acres. And then they had to pay to build if they wanted to build, and they had to pay for infrastructure. So he didn't really invest all that much into this financially.
yeah, he just basically bought this 800 acres. And to that end, he basically he had that church built in Malindi, and then just decided that's not good enough, and he went out and he bought this 800 acres and closed the church.
Well,
Like,
he
just
decided that because there was a lot of negative attention on him at that point,
mhm.
which is something else we see, right? Is like these strange escalations that happen when a cult leader starts to radicalize or be more openly radical, negative attention gets put on them. And rather than that kind of self-correcting or causing people to question their leader, it galvanizes the followers and it encourages the leader to like lean into the paranoia, right? So he had been arrested 3 times. At least once was for radicalization. Another one was for something else. Hold on. Oh, I didn't write it down. Anyway, he was arrested 3 times with things to do with Good News International, with his position
Mhm.
as the pastor there, as a preacher. And was like, I'm shutting the church down. But then very quickly, oh, I have 800 acres in the forest. Do you want to buy a property and come do church there all the time? And so I think
Mhm.
that is interesting because you would think, when you hear them like, well, it was like out in the middle of the forest and they're like on 800 acres. How are we supposed to keep an eye on them? It's like, well, you kind of already knew that you should have been keeping an eye on them. I'm
Yeah,
sure that Kenya has some kind of social services. They have a minister of human rights.
yeah. So,
So
I mean, the thing is it could have been something where we learn about sort of the either ineptitude or the willful ignorance by a lot of the authorities around this thing, that basically they're just kind of, eh. Like, they went out, the cops did go out one time, and in the podcast they mentioned that they did actually see some of the shallow graves, but they kind of,
eh,
yeah, like those. And the thing is his defense, and now that he's in the trial, going through the courts and all that stuff, his defense is what basically the police are. Well, these people made the choice to be there. That's their choice to go do that. And um, there's this thing with the idea of religious freedom, where in a lot of places we believe that you're not allowed to critique the religion, you're not allowed to do anything that makes them feel bad about what they're doing. Just the amount of times we hear, even in America, you can't criticize. That's against my religion. You can't take a dump on my religion that's doing this awful thing. Yeah, I can.
it can. Well, and I think it's interesting too because it's like they presented that in the Africa report piece as though it was unique to Kenya, and it's like it's not at all unique to
Yeah.
Kenya. But the other thing is, so in that piece, we got a lot of the story of a guy named Francis Wanju. And he what I can piece together, because they kind of didn't go too deep on his backstory, but what it sounds like, at some point, Mackenzie was telling the women that were attending his church, if their spouses were not coming to the church, they should leave their spouses. That seems to be what happened in his case, because it does seem, well, I'll explain. So he receives a phone call from his son-in-law's uncle telling him about this cult and what's going on there, and saying your family is there and you need to get them out because it's getting really bad.
Right.
And he calls the police and they basically say, it's none of your business. Why do you care what they're doing? They're allowed to do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And that's when he contacts the human rights guy, Victor Quatro, who then they go. And I think we hear this story twice in both pieces, but from different points of view. They go and they discover a child who is
lashed to a tree
and told that this is your day to die. And they say, well,
they say
in the first one, they say he said he's going to die that day. And the second one, they explain that's not what Mackenzie calls it. But he knew he's going to die that day. They ask him where his siblings are, and he points to 2 fresh graves. But we hear, importantly, in that scene, that a woman in the Africa report piece, that a woman was with that child when they approached, and she ran. And that was his grandmother. So I think that was actually Wanju's wife or ex-wife.
Okay.
Or it could be his grandmother on the other side, because the brother-in-law's or the son-in-law's uncle is who contacted Francis. So it could be on either side, but I'm not 100% sure. We don't hear anything about his wife, so it's hard to know. But either way, that child's grandmother was there.
Yeah.
And knew this was happening and was fine with it. And that he was the oldest. Yeah. So
he was the oldest of his.
Second oldest had already died the day before. And then he was supposed to die that day. And he didn't because they rescued him. But even then the police said, well, we don't really have enough evidence to do anything. It's like, what?
So I'd like to go ahead. Sorry.
Like, how much evidence do you need? At the very least, there's extreme child neglect going on. There's children dying. There should be an investigation of some kind.
Yeah. The idea too is like what they called that, where the kid was being lashed to a tree, they called it his wedding day, because that's the day he was going to die to meet Jesus, which is like, just like, I remember hearing that, I'm like, what wedding? I was like, did I hear that right?
Once those children, and sometimes it wasn't children anymore at this point, because I guess like it became expedient to kill other people, is my assumption. But once these people died, then everybody got juice and cookies and was expected to celebrate. And what I think is very interesting about that is that we know in Paula's Ya's case, she was saying that was one of the things that made it unbearable for her, was being expected to pretend to celebrate because you didn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there probably was some palpable joy and relief from people who were literally starving, getting a hit of sugar from the juice and getting something in their stomachs for the first time in however many days or whatever.
Yeah. Made me wonder how their stomachs would react to it. Because sometimes if you don't have food for a while, or if you don't have, like, sometimes your body will actually like really have difficulty processing it. So
yeah, I think, well, one, we know some people were scavenging, but two, it seems like it was not that everybody was expected to just stop eating permanently and starve, but that there was some kind of system that went along with his weird little plan of like, some people got to eat more often than others. Because otherwise you would start to see things like the elderly people would be dying before the children were dying. You would start seeing some really strange dynamics if everybody just stopped eating.
Yeah, and the elderly were one of the last in the line to have to starve themselves, which, like I said, interesting that was sort of the hierarchy that he chose, and the people were willing to do it, like just to starve themselves. Like, Listen, if I don't get lunch, I'm getting cranky. I can't imagine being starving for days. I really can't. But
I do think that it's one of those things that's like a slow build, because fasting and prayer is very common in strict religions. And you can read about it. You can read about it in the Bible, fast and pray. And that's what he's telling them to do. And then it's like, well, we're going to fast more. Now we're going to fast even more. And, like, I wonder if it's sort of like they became almost conditioned to it.
well, I'm sure they did, because that was part of the whole thing, was to condition people to accept inhumane treatment, and it worked because they
Well, I
did
mean,
it.
like physically conditioned to, like, how long are you starving before, like, if you've ever gone so long without eating, you start to feel sick, and your body is like almost telling you not to eat, even though you know that that's why you're sick, is that you didn't eat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just like when you're a normal person who's, who was running late to work and didn't eat breakfast and then work through lunch. Your blood sugar starts dropping, you start to feel sick. After how many days does it start to be kind of constant that you feel sick?
Yeah. And after so many days, how much is your body kind of eating itself in its own way? Like, not literally eating itself, but like your systems start to break down and shut down,
Yeah.
and like organs will shut down. So, it was, if you saw some of the videos in that piece, where like some of the people, they couldn't even like barely sit up. They were just that
Yeah.
emaciated and weak. And it's amazing that they were alive, to be quite honest.
100%. And they did say, like, when they were rounding these people up, taking them to the hospital, two really interesting things. One, a lot of people didn't want to go.
Yeah.
So for however many people who were there genuinely against their will and would have left had there not been armed guards, there were genuinely people who were there who were like, no, I'm staying here. This is how I get to heaven. I don't want you
Mm-hmm.
to interfere. And then the second thing is that some of these people were so far into the later stages of starvation and malnourishment that they did not make it to the hospital.
Yep.
So that is, I guess I would say, like, our generations, like, the people alive today, we have our own sets of horrors and tragedies, but I feel like some of that had to be very similar to what was going on with the soldiers who came upon the first concentration camps and were seeing
Mm-hmm.
this death and destruction and this extreme starvation, where you did hear stories of these soldiers giving them food and water, like pulling out rations, and then these people getting sick because they couldn't handle it. And like
Mm-hmm.
the trauma of just even witnessing it and trying to help, and then not really being able to because of how serious the situation was and how far progressed it was. So that
Yeah.
was something that really struck me, is like having people refuse help and having to kind of almost like fight them to get them help. But then also, even if they wanted help, some of them just were too far gone to receive it in
Mm-hmm.
like in a meaningful way, health wise.
Yeah, and I mean, they were also in the middle of nowhere, and they had to get to the hospital. Who knows how far? Maybe there was a hospital in Melindy, but still, that was 2.5 hours away. Like, it was
Yeah.
not and it was on dirt roads. It was not like they had highways that they could zoom to the city, like,
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
And it was uh, intentionally rural, intentionally way out there, so that
Yeah.
less people would happen upon them, and all that stuff. So
Which
yeah,
makes you wonder about this fucking organ harvesting shit. Like, what?
yeah,
I'm very eager to find out what comes of the investigations into that, because it's just there's some logistical issues. Like, was there like a place for helicopters to land? Were these being transported in like ambulances? Like, what was going on exactly? Because it's not like, I mean, you can't even reattach a finger if you don't get it immediately on ice and get to the
yeah,
hospital like in a matter of minutes. So what is
yeah,
going on with like livers and kidneys?
yeah. Who knows? And you're right. Like, that was thing that puzzled me too. If he was doing organ harvesting and selling it, like, how are you getting them to where they need to go, where they're still viable? Like,
Yeah.
clearly had a market for it, and people kept soliciting him to get this stuff. My only other concern is it a Hannibal Lecter situation
That's possible.
where he was harvesting organs to actually eat them? I mean,
That's possible.
he
I do
had
think it's
rations, but
interesting that they kept saying he looked very well fed, because I'll say this, he started out heavier. And it does seem like there was some like master level manipulation going on where he was like losing weight to keep people believing he was starving alongside them, but not losing enough weight to actually suffer.
yeah,
That's my guess. That's my like least gracious assumption, because we know he was eating when people were starving and we know he was very manipulative.
yeah, it's a good point. I mean, yeah, maybe that was, and that would be the long con right there, right? Is to just say, I'm going to lose weight gradually, but I'm not going to lose too much weight. I'm going to eat, but it looks like I'm losing weight, so it looks like I'm with them on their journey. That would be highly manipulative and smart in that particular instance. Not deviously smart, but smart. So,
Well, is when you see the early videos of him, he looks like average overweight. Not overweight like, oh, that guy's fat, but like, he's a 30 something, 40 something year old guy. He's got a bit of a belly, he's got chubby cheeks. You're like, yeah, he looks like any 30 or 40 something year old guy with a few extra pounds.
mhm,
But when you see him at the end, he's fit.
mhm,
People are starving, he's fit.
yeah,
So that was interesting to kind of like do, like you're like doing the math, like what exactly was happening that he could make that work, that he could pass that off. But then they think that he's able to heal people by laying on of hands. They think he's able to exorcise demons. Like, for all we know, he's telling them like, oh well, I'm just getting stronger and healthier because it's not my time to go yet. The plan is for me to go last.
or maybe God is helping me to make sure I stay on long enough, or something like that. Yeah, I could see
Yeah.
that. But yeah, uh, so. Sorry, my brain just short circuited there, like where we left off and went. So excuse me there, but
It's okay.
like I said, I didn't take as many notes as I normally do, and that'll teach me that lesson to be smarter on that.
Well,
Um,
so I would say where we get to is that, so Ya and her two friends, Paula Ya and her two friends are there. They've not wanted to be there since the day they got there, but they've also not felt safe enough to escape.
right.
And again, this is the situation where we get two different descriptions. It's kind of interesting because the Africa report was very news-like,
Yeah.
like you were watching, a special report on the news. But in some cases, that served better because there were points in the podcast where it felt like the host was a little reticent to be as plain.
Hmm.
So in the podcast, it's like, well, her friend was brutalized by one of the guards. But in the Africa report, and she says it, her friend was raped by one of the guards. And I think that's an important distinction because they are two very different crimes.
Yep.
Like you can beat the shit out of somebody and that's really bad and it shouldn't happen, but it's not the same as beating the shit out of them and raping them.
Hmm.
And so that is the catalyst for them to say, you know what, we're not doing this. Like if we die in the woods, we die in the woods, but we're not staying here. And they actually get caught, which was really interesting to me. I think the podcast did do a better job, I think, of putting you in
Hmm.
the like emotional space that these people were in, but they go to leave, they're sneaking out in the middle of the night and they are spotted by a guard and they're like, this is it. He's gonna kill us. And for whatever reason, he looked right at them and just decided
Yeah.
whatever and walked away. And you could read that 100 ways, right? Like maybe this particular guard was like, go, leave. Or
Yeah.
maybe their interpretation was he just thought that they weren't a threat and that they weren't going to do anything. Maybe it's that. Who knows? But for whatever reason, they had that moment of divine intervention or fucking whatever, and they were able to leave and they made it out.
Yeah, that was interesting because of the guard. Like, basically, it's like something you would see in a movie, like, oh, is he going to see me kind of thing. And then they made it very clear that he saw them.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't something like, oh, maybe he didn't see us. It was he saw them and then just kind of went on his merry way. And then they were free to go, free to go and then try to escape. And that had to be super hard. Like, they were malnourished and they had to get out of there and try to go through a forest, one, and hope not to get eaten by a giant cat, two, to hope that their bodies don't break down too much before they can get to a spot where they could get help, which in this case they came upon a road and somebody happened to be going on that road and pick them up. Like, that's clearly this is not like a main thoroughfare that's near there.
Right.
This is just a road.
Very purposefully, it is not near any main thoroughfare or place you would expect to just wander upon a road where someone would be driving down it. And that's why I say it is almost like a, God in the machine kind of like, and everything's okay now. And you're like, wait, how? But in this case, this genuinely is how it played out. And they just got very lucky or very blessed or very whatever, depending on what your beliefs are, because they made it out and the odds were not in their favor at any point in that entire story.
Yeah. So at that point, they go to the police when they get back to Malindi and tell about this. Or did they go to the guy with the other guy who wasn't part of the
Victor Quato?
Victor Quato, yeah. Did they go to him and not the police? I think they went to him.
I think they did go directly to him this time. Because that's actually where I stopped taking notes. We both went easy on this one, which is kind of, I do believe they went to him because there was already knowledge that the cops weren't doing anything. And it does, again, because we're hearing two different stories from two different points of view, it does seem that when he went, that was with Francis Wanju and where they found Francis's grandson. I think that was the same event, but it doesn't sound like it in the two different versions of the story just because of how the timelines are laid out differently due to the detail, because the focus of the story is different. But it's hard to know that for sure. Because it seems that as soon as Victor Quato got involved and actually went there and saw it with his own eyes, he was like, we're doing something about it right now.
Yeah. When they first went, the guys that Victor had with him, actually the kid that was lashed to a tree was one of those guys' cousins. Like they were like, well, where's your siblings? And their other cousins and their other cousins were buried. So like there was people that had real stakes in this because they had all these people missing and nothing, and the cops didn't really do anything about it. And it was like not just like 5 people missing, it was like hundreds. And it's amazing. Like, it makes me wonder if there was some sort of kickback kind of thing to the cops to kind of maybe ignore some of this stuff.
Well, it's also interesting. This isn't something I had time to research, but it could be another cultural thing. Like in Japan, if you're married and you have kids and you get a divorce, like there's no legal recognition of the father at all. It's like, well, if you wanted to be in your kid's life, you should have found a way to stay married. And then that becomes even more of an issue if the father is like not a citizen, which is basically almost any immigrant to Japan is not a citizen, right?
Right.
So that's how it is right now in 2025 in Japan, which is, as developed as here or the biggest city in Kenya or anywhere else. So it's possible maybe that was part of it, where it's like, yeah, your wife left and took the kids. So fucking what?
Yeah.
I didn't have a chance to look into it, but knowing that, like, there's still cultures where that's very common. Maybe that played a role, because again, that's what Francis Wanju was told. Why do you care? It's none of your business. I was like, well, it's his family. Like most people would care and feel like it was their business. So I think there might be a cultural element combining this like, well, it's their church and they can do what they want, with why, like, genuinely, why do you care? And I don't know what that is, but that's just a possibility. That's me spitballing.
Yeah. So it is just like I said, lots of good fortune, I think. It's just they get back to civilization, and now they're going to get people involved to go. And this is when they actually do raid the thing, like a full on raid this time. Um, and the cops get in. They actually don't just like sneak in. They go straight into the compound. They said people wanted to run but couldn't because they were so emaciated. Like uh, there was like one where there was like some graves that they saw, and somebody was laying right next to it, and they couldn't move. They were too spent, and just they're going through all this stuff, and they're seeing just how bad this is, and they could see that there's lots of graves just all over the place. And then the one guy says, "What's that?" And they look, and there's like this. That's where they find Mackenzie's house, who's like
Yeah.
got solar panels on it for electricity, and it's like a reasonably nice place, and has a refrigerator with like fresh water and all kinds of stuff in it, and food, just like he has all the things. Um, and they're just beside themselves. I think at this point they arrest him. Yeah, they arrest him,
Yes.
and I think his brother and his third wife. This is the third wife that's now there with him. So yeah, there's that too.
Yeah. And he's got several children, because the son that they interview in the Africa Report piece says that he's a father and he has young children at home that need him. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how many. They didn't say, don't know the ages, anything like that, but it's just like, what?
Well, if you imagine how most of the cults we've seen have some sort of where the leader is, taking liberties with some of his flock. So I would imagine he probably has a few kids from that. So, and this is all presumption. This is anything concrete. This is just judging on Pat's experience of all the cults we've reviewed, and just how many of them are just, now I'm the leader. Guess what? I want to have sex with all these particular ladies because I want to, and
Well,
I can't.
and they found again after exhuming the initial set, because again, this is still work they're doing. They're still digging graves. After exhuming the initial set of bodies, they found evidence of child sexual abuse and rape in the adult women. And we know that there was rape happening from other people than Mackenzie, I say, as well, because I don't think there's any reason to believe that he was not involved in the rapes of the bodies that they found. Like it just seems unbelievable that would be happening without his knowledge and consent and involvement.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see there's any way that stuff was happening, and he wasn't participating in some fashion, whether it be condoning it or being involved himself. I would believe he probably was involved himself because he was the leader. He was the God figure of that church, quite literally, because he
And it
said
does
that
seem
God
that
spoke
that's
to him.
what he wanted out of being a preacher from the time he decided he wanted to be a preacher, was the power and control.
Yep.
And people who want power and control are often the same kind of people who participate in sexual abuse.
Well, the idea too is, remember we said early on where the siblings said when he was a kid, when he was angry, he would just lash out whoever was near him. Well, there's a lot of commands to kill folks. There's strangulation, there's beatings, there's all kinds of stuff. So, and if he was that violent, it stands to reason that he would also participate in that too, right?
Yeah. What I think is also really interesting, his mother and his son are both like, he's innocent, he didn't do any of this. And then they talk to his brother in the Africa Report piece, and his brother talks about having a really hard time coming to terms with it. They don't really talk about what his brother said about his temper in that piece.
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that they left that out. and put it in context of his wife, or sorry, his mother and his son saying he's innocent. Um, you get as much time as you get when you're doing an hour-long piece on something as complex as this, but I thought that
Yep.
was an interesting editorial choice because it almost makes it seem like his brother, when I was watching it, I was like, is his brother like agreeing with the mom and son? And then
Yeah.
he gets to the end of what he's saying, and it's like, oh, okay, he's not.
Yeah.
So it was a weird editorial choice. I don't know. It kind of stuck with me because it's like we then get later that his brothers were like, no, he was violent and angry and also very charismatic, but don't piss him off and don't be around him if someone else does. And that seems like kind of a big deal
Yeah.
to me.
Seems like a behavioral pattern.
Yeah.
That
Like
little bit.
nobody expects to find out that their brother, no matter how big an asshole he is, ran a cult that starved hundreds of people to death. I don't have
Yeah.
any problem going like, yeah, I think it'd take me some time to process that and wrap my head around it too. That I don't have a problem with. It was just like the choice of not of like where they put it in the documentary and not adding any context to what his brothers had to say about him as a person.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's the point, though. You talked about the deaths. Like, looking here just now, it says that they at some point they estimate like I think the last update was 427 total deaths reported at this grave out of the graves, and there's still like the missing people report stood at 613 that they believe that he had touched. So 613 people are missing affiliated
In
with this
addition
guy.
or total?
No, total. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's
the
what,
total missing, and then which 427 were killed. So and listen, Mackenzie's position, like you said, it's like I'm not guilty. Those people had their choices to do this. And that's the thing is they didn't. They didn't. They were brainwashed and then forced to stay. So like that wasn't a choice.
well, and some of
Maybe.
them were literally strangled to death, and you can't
Mhm.
strangle yourself to death. Your body would not, you're not strong enough at a certain point, you know?
Yeah, you'd faint before you did it. So.
It's very, yeah. I mean, he's so like, not that we expect these people to not be full of shit, but it's like the Human Rights Commission of your country was there, dude. Like they saw it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see what comes of this. Like I said, we covered this as a news item on one of our very early episodes, I think twice, because there was an update back then. And it's kind of one of those things where you're like, I think we even said when we covered it as a news piece, like, oh, we'll be covering a documentary on this someday. And it's interesting because we're covering it now, but it's definitely not over.
No.
There's still, it seems that they believe there are more bodies to be exhumed from the piece that I read from a few months ago, that they had to stop so that they could identify the ones that they had, which has been ongoing as this process goes. But there's a lot of them and there's a backlog. And then, other people are dying of natural causes and everything else that happens in any area. So, their medical examiners and coroners or whatever the equivalent to that is in Kenya, they have to deal with all of this and just the normal day to day that anybody else in that job has to deal with. So that's just the bodies that haven't been
Mhm.
uncovered. And there's got to be a record somewhere of where the money was like coming and going from. I find it difficult to believe the amount of money we're talking about was all in cash. And if it was, then they would have found the cash. So
Yeah, I don't know about that, but that makes sense. Like it feels like where is that? But one of the other things that I found, there's a lot of things that are interesting, and it sounds weird to say that when we're talking about a starvation cult, but like there was like 16 different people charged when they arrested him. So like all the people that were, including his wife and one of his sons, and like I guess the higher level guards or whatever. Um, one of the guards was he had a weird name like Lucky or something like that.
Right, and that was a guy who knew from pretty much the beginning that Mackenzie was full of shit.
Yeah, he knew that he was coaching people how to act like they were healed and all that shit. But he thought, well, listen, if it's a little bit of a con, but people feel better, what's the harm? Is how they phrase it in the podcast. I was like, well,
I
yeah,
think
but
that that's probably the story that he tells,
to make himself feel
right?
better, probably, yeah.
But then he stayed once people started dying.
Hmm.
He
It
stayed
was a guard.
once the guards were being ordered to keep people there upon threat of death.
Yeah, and then the thing is, some guards killed some of the folks there, so it would make me wonder: was he participating in that, or was
Yeah,
he just
that guy
willfully ignorant?
sounds. And the other thing too is he was not. I think it's very interesting. It's like it sounds like he wants. You get the information that people give you in these situations, right? It sounds like he
Right?
wants to be presented as someone who was like it was a job, and I didn't think too hard about it, but he received special treatment, so
Hmm.
it wasn't just a job.
Well, also Mackenzie told him that he needed to choose one of his kids to have a wedding day, and that's when he and his wife and kids escaped.
Right.
That's when he left. Was when it was a problem for him.
Yeah. Well, because
So
up until then, he was getting extra food and he was getting water and he was getting paid extra. It's like, okay, buddy. So what were you doing that made you worth all that?
yeah, but so I'm wondering, he wasn't one of them because he got out before the arrest. He wasn't one of the people that was arrested. So and they've all pled not guilty. What's interesting is that also there's the laws in there are different than our land for sure.
Mhm.
65 of the victims, the people that are part of the church that were quote unquote rescued, were charged with attempted homicide or attempted suicide. That's actually a law
Yeah.
there. I was like, wow,
I
these
think
people.
it was like it's actually like relatively recent in US history that that law was taken off the books.
Yeah, it still just seems odd. Like, you know what I mean? Like in modern parlance, that seems like really old school. But his
It's
third
also
wife. Go
sorry, go
ahead,
ahead.
sir. No, you go.
I say it's also like, well, did this guy are you charging Mackenzie with the crime? Or are you charging them with the crime that says that Mackenzie didn't do anything, they did it to themselves? Because you kind of have to choose.
Yeah, I thought I saw that they didn't actually charge him with like murder or anything like that. It was like some other charge, like dece- deceitful, some weird crime. But like, what's interesting is I'm reading this straight from Wikipedia, so take that with however grain of salt, how many grains of salt you need to. But the magistrate court released his third wife, who was there and got arrested, on a personal bond of uh, what equates to 711 US dollars and a surety bond of about 2,100 US dollars. In the ruling, he said that the state had failed to prove why she should be continue to be held with the other accused persons. In regard to Mackenzie and the 16 co-accused, the court ruled that they should remain in custody for another 30 days. I don't know if that's like a rolling thing that they have to continue ruling on,
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know how
but
bail works. But I also wonder if I mean like again, this is all details that will come to light later. And I think like the first version of the story is probably gonna be relatively inaccurate. But like, was his wife there because she wanted to be there?
mhm.
Was she did she have any power in the situation? Like,
Oh, she wouldn't have had any power. He wouldn't have allowed that. He would have just given her the preferential treatment, is what my guess would have been. But
but I mean like the power to leave in as much as anybody else had. Like it was possible to leave. We saw somebody did it, but they
mhm.
didn't. They had to really work up to that. But if you're living in that house with him and he probably identified her as property. Um, maybe you got fed more than everybody else, but there were probably other things that were happening that were very awful and very
Mhm.
controlling. But who knows? It could be the other way. It could be that she was happy to be in a position of perceived power. And, I mean, it's like these are things we're going to know in 10 years, I think, not in the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's gonna be a while till we get the whole thing, and it'll be a while till we get an actual like full-on documentary on it. Once it plays out, I think is when that will happen, if we get anything. The problem is because it is in Africa, and Americans tend to not make stories about stuff like that,
Yeah.
unless it's like Jonestown. Now, the thing is, your body count here should demand some sort of documentary about this whole thing
Yeah.
because that is an enormous amount of death that he caused.
So I have a thing, on my little app where I get my news, where I specifically have it aggregate any headlines that involve the word cult, because we do this. And your algorithms are supposed to be influenced by what you look at and what you read. And like I said, we've been
Mhm.
following this from the first time that news broke. And I've seen like 5 articles about it.
Yeah,
A lot has developed, a lot of information has come to light, a lot is going on, and it's just not making it over here.
yeah, and like I said, try like your news item today was about something in Australia. Like I never heard anything about that. Why? Because Americans kind of focus on them. Like it
Well,
feels
to
like.
be fair, I don't know that Europeans are getting that kind of news either, because again, it's niche. It's like I've got a thing that if a headline occurs with cult in it, it gets delivered personally to me.
Right,
Um,
straight to your
but like
doorstep.
the Africa thing, it's like if you talk to people, a lot of people think that all of Africa looks like Shakahola Forest. And it's like, no, like Nairobi is a massive city center. It's a city. It's like San Francisco or Los Angeles or, a genuine metropolis. The reason they were out in the middle of the forest was so they could live like that, so he
Hmm.
could isolate them. That's not how people in Africa actually live day to day, but people kind of think that it is. I think people have this very poorly filtered concept of what goes on in different African countries.
Hmm. Well, for sure. The thing is, we also get a lot of pretty steady diet of very racially uh, in, racially incorrect media about how Africa looks. And the problem is we get like images of very super rural Africa where everybody doesn't have a lot of money and but there's plenty of places of affluence too. But it's America has tons of places where there's just people that don't have a lot of means either. The thing is what we see is not having a lot of means, and what we see them not having a lot of means. They see like, oh, they have to walk and go get water. Like, okay, yeah, and that's.
I also think that if Americans were a little bit more honest with themselves, they would be able to see that what poor in a city looks like is very different from what poor in a rural area looks like.
Mhm.
Where I live, you can die from being outside in the summer, and we have a massive homeless population, no shoes, no water, nowhere, no, we have no shelters, we have no soup kitchens, we have nothing. Their lives don't look too different from the life of somebody living in an African village that you would see on TV, except
Mhm.
that instead of lean-tos and shacks, they have tents.
Mhm.
That's not that fucking different.
Nope.
It's just that in these places, they actually get to set up their shelter in a semi-permanent fashion, whereas the people who live here in that level of poverty in a place without a shelter get cleared out every so often and have to go move to a different patch of desert until they get cleared out of that one. We have police officers chasing homeless people around cities and towns, knowing they don't have anywhere to go, So, yeah, where do you think those people go for water? There's nowhere for them to go to get water. They have to hope
Yeah.
someone gives them water. Like, it's worse here in a lot of ways, but it looks cleaner because when, someone takes a picture of downtown Joshua Tree, they don't take a picture like behind the building where the homeless person is sitting there nearly dying of thirst.
Yeah.
But people don't have any problem taking pictures like that in Africa. I couldn't imagine why.
Yeah. So anyway, I just think it's worth noting that Americans have a pretty preconceived notion. They just basically believe that, like, not everyone, but, like, you know what I mean. A lot of
Yeah,
Americans have the
culturally,
perception
yeah.
that everybody in Africa lives in huts or something like that. And that's not how it is at all. But I mean, there are folks that do. But like,
It's what we're fed
mm,
in film and TV and in news reports and everything else. Like, you don't see I would not be surprised to hear someone honestly be like, "Oh, I thought Dubai was like the only city, like major city in Africa."
there's quite a few major cities in Africa. But
Yeah, but would you be surprised like to hear that from somebody in the US though? I don't think I would with the way
no, I
that
wouldn't be.
that
I would be
people are.
surprised. I would be surprised
Okay,
if they thought. I would be surprised if they thought Dubai was in Africa.
well, that too.
There's that. We aren't really great at geography either. Also, I wanted to point out that some of the articles here talking about Paul McKenzie, he was charged with the murder of 191 children. So he actually has murder charges
Okay,
against him
yeah.
and
That's
manslaughter charges as well. So and also terrorism charges.
oh,
That
that's
was
that's the one I was
that's
trying
what
to
that was.
remember. Yeah, because I thought that was really interesting because we have a lot of talk in our political climate right now about what counts as terrorism. Um, but in the classes that I had to take in like my continuing education in the military, you have to take like distance learning classes basically to make the next rank. Terrorism is defined pretty plainly, and I've seen this definition other places. Like how our government defines terrorism
Mhm.
is political, social, or religious using violence to promote political, social, or religious change or ideas, or not necessarily violence. I mean, it's like I'm not quoting this directly. I should have looked it up, but
Yeah.
it's like using violence to create fear and to make like basically to force change in one of these sections through violence and terror and fear. So like it's not terrorism if I commit a hate crime against somebody of a different religion than me because I just don't like that person, I want to see them suffer, that's a hate crime, that's different. But if I am plotting against, a very specific religious group because I want it's getting really hard to talk about this without talking about current domestic policy in the US. Um,
Yeah, I
because
imagine
I
so.
want I want that group to go away, to become unpopular, to be, now it's illegal to be in that group, whatever. That's why I'm doing it. That's terrorism.
Yeah,
Also, that is
but
domestic policy in the US currently,
yeah,
but whatever.
yeah. But that is interesting that they charge him with terrorism. So yeah, I don't know. But he is also on trial for other things, and we're not going to know the results of this for a bit because these things can take time. Uh, Hopefully, we'll get some news on this, and then we can report on me because that trial started in 2024, and I see nothing about it being resolved yet. So
I mean, they're not even done collecting the bodies, which is like kind of important.
yeah,
Um, so I do think maybe we're seeing also something we see in the US a lot, which is like there's pressure to move, there's pressure to show that you're doing something about it. But in trying to appease people who are putting that pressure on you, you kind of fuck things up a little bit because you can't if 3 months ago you were still exhuming bodies, that's the last news that I saw, right?
Mhm.
I looked it up today. 3 months ago, you're still exhuming bodies, but you gave the murder charges a year ago. Like, how does that work? You don't even know how many people are dead yet.
Well, maybe they're doing it like maybe they don't have to do it all at once. They could do it. I'm charging with this, and then I can add more charges as we get more
Yeah, but
information.
that
But
seems
yeah,
needlessly complicated and
but
opens.
maybe they're doing that to keep him in prison.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know what their laws are like. So
I don't
that's the
either.
other side of it. But it seems a little bit like there's some rushing. Understandably so. People want blood. You can't like you can't kill kids and expect people to be like, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, it's all good. Yeah,
um, but it does seem like you want an investigation before a trial, not in the middle of the trial.
yeah. Like I said, we don't know how their laws work over there, so it might be just something they're doing this as a reason to keep him in prison while they keep accumulating evidence. I don't know. I really don't. But it was just interesting that they were still working on it, but they'd already been charged with multiple things already. So it seems kind of weird for us as Americans because that's not how it works here. But it's just interesting that that's the way it goes.
Yeah, and it could be any number of things in reality. Like, without having that cultural context, I think we could even probably get some pretty black and white information and still get it wrong because we're viewing it through, you know, an American lens with the US court system being what's been ingrained in us, oftentimes incorrectly anyway. Like,
Yeah.
so, like and I think that's at the heart of a lot of what is missing in like our understanding. Part of it is that there's just a lot missing because the investigation isn't over yet, but part of it is genuinely, it's like, well, you know, is the reason that they didn't go looking for these women and their children because they didn't give a shit? Is it because the way that custody laws work there? Is it something else? Is it, we just don't know.
Right.
And it would be helpful if there was more information to draw from, but it just doesn't seem like there actually is. There's a
Mm.
lot of short, 30 minute to hour long videos produced by different like news type companies on YouTube, but then they're from different countries. So you don't know, is this a trustworthy news source? Is it a reliable
Yep.
news source? Who, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I don't know either. But yeah. So to be continued, I guess, on this because we're going to have to learn what we learned from when the trial finishes, and who knows how long that's going to go on. Again, we don't know because we don't know or understand how the court system works there. So it seems to work very differently than it does here, but
yeah.
how? I don't know. So
Yeah. But you see weird stuff here too. Like, I don't know if you saw this, and I'm not necessarily recommending this documentary, because despite it being very well done, it was really hard to watch. But I think it's Netflix, The Perfect Neighbor.
I haven't watched that yet. That is something I think I have to be in a particular mood to watch.
Yes, I agree. It was very hard to watch due to the nature of how they put it together.
Hmm.
You have footage of things you normally wouldn't see in a documentary, and they're very emotional. Um, like it's doorbell cameras and body cam footage. So, normally when a documentary happens, you're getting people telling you what happened after the fact with a little bit of
Mm.
film. But in this case, you're seeing things like you hear the gunshot and then you see the child who just saw his mother get shot show up on the doorbell camera of a neighbor saying call 911. Really hard to watch. Not
Yeah.
even the hardest part of that documentary to watch. And also, it's just enraging. But one of the things that I was getting kind of irritated watching, but then I kind of had to like take a step back and think about is that she is treated in a way by the court system and the police after this happens that feels like, what the fuck? Why are they being so good to her? This is insane. Like, anybody else
Hmm.
behave this way, they, whatever. And it's like, oh, because they know through this whole thing that she's very litigious. She's very like, she would do, they make one mistake and she's going to get away with it. And they know that. And so it was kind of interesting once that clicked for me to be like, oh, that's why she's being like, she's kind of getting away with stuff that you just don't expect people to get away with. It's because they want to be sure that she doesn't get away with the big thing. And it's really weird to watch, even once you realize that's what's going on. But yeah, so there's stuff like she was let out on bail. She was treated kind of nicely. I wouldn't say over the top nice, but like I've seen a lot of video in the interrogation room, and the way that she was behaving, I was like, oh my God, like I'm surprised that this is not a documentary about police brutality. So yeah, it's kind of, so you kind of wonder sometimes they're doing things for reasons that don't make sense until you really think about it. And in this case, with all the cultural differences and differences in the legal system, it's like we don't have enough information to give it that kind of analytic and figure out, like, does it make sense why they're doing it this way, or what?
I don't know. I'll have to check that out, but I think, like I said, there's certain things that I know going in, like I really need to be in the right headspace to watch it, and so
it's a huge bummer. I would say that right now. It's a huge bummer. It's very difficult to watch. I think it's worth watching. If you are the kind of person, like, we say in this, like, it's not going to change your life. You don't have to watch it. It's really intense subject matter. There's a lot of racism and violence, and just really some of it kind of triggered memories for me from when I was a kid. We had a crazy bitchy old lady neighbor. I think a lot of people did. And you kind of are like, God, is this like how like this fucking happened,
Yeah.
So definitely be in the right headspace for it. But it's an interesting documentary because of the way that it's done, and actually seeing in this particular case how helpless everyone was to stop it from escalating.
Yeah, let me marinate on that one for a bit, but yeah.
Except for, like better gun control laws, but
yeah. Dare to dream. Anyway. Why don't we not much more to say on this, I don't think, on the starvation cult. Like I said, we still don't have all the answers, so take some time. We'll see what comes out in the news. But once we do get more news, we'll definitely update you folks on that. So,
yeah.
So let's talk about Renee. You got to pick this one. So we are going to be discussing. Oh, wrong one. Sorry.
We already did that one. I do it again if you want.
No. No, the promo, there it is. Sorry, they were moved around, so apologies there.
So this is from I have a friend who's like just as into cults as I do. We've been kind of idly planning a field trip to Unarius for like off and on, for a long time. And he owns a local bookstore, so whenever I want to buy a book, I go in and we just bullshit for a really long time. So he told me about this. So the whole series of The Curious Case is great, but this one in particular would interest us because of the cult connection.
Right.
And all I know about it, okay, is like where to watch it, what it's called, and that somewhere in this woman who's the leader of this cult gets into cat rescue and starts making her followers adopt cats, but not like a cat, but like my friend said they're doing interviews with people who are like, we had so many cats in the house that we could no longer live in the house.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I'm sure, like in any situation where people are being taken advantage of and all of that, there's going to be a lot of really serious shit to deal with. But I am fascinated by this.
Me too.
Also,
like of all the things.
Great, like so many opportunities for puns about catholics.
For sure.
Anyway, it's a
Alright.
thinker. It's okay. Um, yeah, I'm pretty excited for this one. And it's like a cat cult. Man, you
Yeah. Not one that when you
always
said, "Oh,
say,
what about this?"
huh?
You were like, "Hey, how about this?" And I'm like, Yes."
Yeah. Well, we always say people think that like, oh, I'd never join a cult. It's like, well, you may never join a Christian cult, and you may
Yeah.
never join a yoga cult, but there's something out there that they could hook you with. And I'm like, oh, fuck, a cat cult. Shit.
Yeah. That could be a problem. So yeah. So that's on HBO. Just for the
I think
record,
it's
if
also
anybody
on
wants,
Hulu
it
if
might be on
you don't have
Hulu as
HBO.
well. Okay. So check it out there. That will be January 7th, same time, same bat channel. So any other things to wrap up before we call it an evening, Renee?
I don't think so.
Me either. So thanks everybody for watching. Really appreciate it. Renee, thanks as always for doing this with me. We always have a blast. And we will see you in January. Cheers.
Bye.